Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul?
and Jolene. And today we're talking about game flow.
Ooh.
This is a episode that came from a
Facebook post.
yes, not a question to us directly, but a question asked nonetheless.
Right. So it was an interesting question, and the guy who asked the question got quite a few answers, and I answered it myself. I had a few comments to make. So I thought it was an interesting comment. Interesting question that we could probably...
Well, you need to tell them what the question is.
How do they make the games flow better, or run better, or quicker?
And specifically, I believe he was talking about how people might have to wait for their turn in combat. And if you have a large table, that could bore some people.
Right. And I guess the deal is that he was running a game, and it was taking a long time between players, right? Between the first and the last person.
Well, he said he had like six players in his game.
That doesn't seem to be like a lot of players.
But I have been in games where the combat, each person takes it. Once it's your turn, you have a good 15 minutes, so you could get up and go to the bathroom if you needed to, right? Because especially some combats take a long time.
If you're not involved in the combat, but like if you're involved in the combat, it shouldn't take that long, right? I don't understand.
From the time it's my turn until it comes back to my turn, in the initiative order, it can take a long time, depending on how many people are playing.
Well, I ran D&D 5th edition and Pathfinder, and you played in both of those campaigns, or all three of them, whatever it is. And it took a long time between when you went and then between everybody when it got back to you.
Hello, between Steve telling you of can I do this and giving you some crazy idea, and Ian, Alan, and Augustine each calculating their numbers and not always being ready for their turn when it came along. Sometimes it took a while. And I'm not complaining. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I can see the point that the game master was making, and this was at a convention game, so he had players that he didn't necessarily know, so maybe some of them might have thought, oh, this is taking a long time. But I've never really met a tabletop role player that has actually voiced that opinion. Because one, when it's other people's turn, you're listening to what they're doing, right? And watching their miniatures if you have miniatures out or whatever.
Right. I think you're paying attention, unless that's the problem. I think is when they stop paying attention and they start fiddling with their phones or something like that. Then I could see that being a problem. So
he was specifically talking about combat, right?
I think
during
so.
A combat session.
I think so.
I would say that the more there has been times when it's taken that long to get back to my turn, but it's never been boring for me. One, right. I have to figure out what I'm going to do next.
Yeah.
And then there's always the little side conversations going on at the table, which may or may not be a good thing, but your people that you're with are going, okay, if he does this, then I'll do that. Right.
Oh, that stuff. Yeah. I think that's pretty natural in most groups. So this guy was specifically talking about a con game, and he had some numbers. I forget what the numbers of players he had. I think you said it was 6.
I think it was 6.
Which is weird because some people have handled like large groups, right? I remember I ran Space Opera, and my normal number of people playing would be 8.
But Space Opera is a pretty exciting game if there's combat. One, you don't know if you're gonna get blown out into space,
right?
Because you never know what's gonna happen. So there's a lot of things to take into consideration. So you might want to think a little bit before your turn.
Are you saying that science fiction games are naturally more exciting?
No, I wouldn't go there. I played in Traveler.
Is that a comment against the GM?
No.
I think that the thing is the GM has a lot of...
That was a comment against the grids.
You have a problem with... So you don't like charts, and now it's grids. Okay, so this guy had a valid question. I think when you're the GM and you're running a combat game, and the players seem to tune out when it's not their turn, that's a problem, right? When you have bored players, maybe. And in that case, I think all kinds of things are happening, right? It could be the system is very complicated, and it could be that some people are not ready. I mean, there's a plethora of things that could be impeding this game flow. So
I think one of them could be that if you're at a con, they could be tired.
no, really, no way.
And also, I would just like to point out that maybe it's not the GM, maybe it's the player.
Like I said, there's all kinds of things that where the problem might lie, and I think as a GM, you can mitigate a lot of that by. And I wrote some things down. Hence, wow, exactly, crazy. So the first thing I thought was know the rules, right? As a GM, you got to know the rules, forwards and backwards, if you're going to run out of con. Now, I just ran a game that I didn't know the rules forwards and backwards because it was a game in progress, right? So it's going to be published pretty soon, but the writer is still working on the rules and stuff, and so I had a document called 5.6, and it had been, which had started 1.1, and right like a week or 2 weeks before the convention, he gave me the 6.0 document, which he changed quite a bit of stuff in it. You know how damage is taken, and they added some elements, and I was like, wow, that. Should I incorporate that or should I leave that out? So I wanted to incorporate it because it's the latest version of that game, and I want to show a version that was as most accurate as I could make. And because he's testing out that stuff, right? And so my game is a test of some sort, a play test. And I'm running it again. I'm running it with my group, my home group, the same adventure and everything. So I didn't have game mastery, but a lot of times I read the rules, especially in a role-playing game. I read the rules, I figure out how it works, and then what I forget is like just weird little things that sometimes escapes most people.
The minutia.
Yeah. So like, for example, and it's not going to mean anything to anybody who hasn't played the game, but I kept rolling location. And in the game, in the rules, it says don't roll location unless it's a critical hit. That's the only time you want to roll location. Otherwise, it's just it could be anywhere. And I was making them roll location. And what was funny was like everyone they shot in the game at the convention got hit in the arm. They were making fun of the fact that they kept shooting people in the arm. Like not the same guy, though sometimes it was. But other like every NPC that they came across that they had a battle with, I thought that was kind of funny. So I gave him a short battle report to the author. Right, I sent him not an email. I messaged him actually, and he goes, "Oh, you're not supposed to roll hit location unless it's a critical hit." And I'm like, "Oh, I totally watched that." So I thought it was pretty funny.
That is pretty funny when you're testing a game and you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, I know, but it's bound to happen. Like I said, it was.
Well, if you get the new set of what do you call it?
Rules, the new version.
The new version of the rules right before you go to play, you might get it wrong. I would have just gone with the old version and then said, okay, there's a new version, and when the game comes out, it's going to be different, right? Because it's basically a play test of the game,
right? Exactly.
And I did. Now, here's the question. Did the rolling location and everybody hitting people in the arm make it a more interesting game for the players?
I think they found it funny. So,
right.
So they were engaged in that. I mean, that caused a bit of a, what do you call it, levity in the game, right? And so, because it's a real brutal game. And the players were very careful about not getting into combat because they saw on their character sheet, I got like 5, 6, 7 hit points.
I'm gonna die.
And if you get shot by a gun, you get hit, you're gonna get like three points of damage. And if they roll lucky,
you're not gonna get up.
Yeah, that's what happens.
Your friends are gonna pull you off the battlefield.
So I in that game I actually had 2 extra characters for players because I thought maybe some of them might die.
But you said at the con game the people were very, very,
very cautious. Yes.
They refused to even go after anything that...
They didn't want to go into combat.
Yeah.
And
they were soldiers, right?
They were soldiers, yes.
On a mission.
They're very smart soldiers. And very task-orientated.
So that's interesting that you say that the GM needs to know the rules forwards and backwards.
Right.
I think also the players need to know the rules for their characters. Like, And that's different at a con game than at a regular home game.
Right.
So whenever I have a character, I try to learn all the rules for, especially if I'm a sorceress or something.
Of course.
I want to learn all of the rules for my spells so that I know what I'm doing, right?
Right.
Because one, if I don't know what I'm doing, the boys will take the time to explain it to me. And there's nothing like being mansplained by an 18-year-old.
Well,
sometimes you need it.
It's better than when he was 12.
Yes. No, it's not.
Oh, no?
So
Okay.
I learned early on that you should really know the rules for your character, right? So if you have a special ability or something and you're going to use it during combat, if you're not prepared and you have to look it up or you have to have the GM look it up,
right,
then that makes it take longer. So I think not only the GM but the player characters, the players need to know the rules for their character.
Right. Well, yeah, but you're right. I mean, that definitely helps make the game flow. But this is GM. Right at the moment, I'm thinking about GMs and what they can do. Because if they know the rules better, then they don't have to look in the book, which talk about game flow. Game flow stops, right? Well, then let me look this up. And then their nose in the book and role playing stops.
That is true, except for just so everybody's aware, you're going to have one player who's going to pull something out of thin air that you've never heard of. And he's telling you that, yes, I can do that, right? So you, depending on how outrageous it is, you may stop the game to look it up or may go, okay, go ahead and then look it up later.
Right. And that's what most people say who run a lot of games. They say, make a ruling, don't worry about the rules. And I think something like that should be probably a discussion right when you start the game. I really don't like stopping gameplay to look up rules. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a ruling, and I'm going to try to be as fair as possible, and we're going to keep the game moving.
So what if the player does something so outrageous that you're like, I don't think that character can do that? Are you going to go, okay?
Yeah, you're just going to say, no, you know what?
Well,
I've never seen that rule.
Sitting in their chair all upset.
I've never seen that rule. Or if it's something that's so important to the player, then maybe depending on how long the game's going, you say, you know what, let's take a 5-minute, 10-minute break, go get some water, and I'll look this up, and I'll have
have a conversation.
But if it happens like 5 minutes into the game, or 10 minutes, or 30 minutes, then you gotta,
or in the middle of combat,
or whatever. What I'm saying is not that far into the game, or in the middle of combat. You're right. You don't want to stop that in the middle of combat
because you don't want to stop in the middle of combat when someone is in the middle of an acrobatic attack.
Yeah, I still think that if you really know the rules pretty well, there's less rules lawyering. If you show your mastery of the game and people are like, wow, this guy really knows his stuff, maybe I got it wrong. I don't know. I've never really dealt with somebody that was that adamant about something the GM said, no, I don't think that's right. And he goes, oh, yeah. I have seen sort of that, but quickly it's dealt with.
I was specifically thinking about Ian and some of his ideas that he really reads the rules and different things and comes up with really intricate ideas about what he wants to do. And sometimes I've seen you look at him and go, okay, you can do it. I'm not sure that you can, but go ahead.
I don't remember that, but yeah, I guess that, yeah, you're right. He is one of those players that reads the rules and tries to...
Well, he tries to come up with things that are exciting for him, right?
Right.
And it makes it, sometimes a player like that makes it harder for the GM or easier for the GM because it makes the game more exciting.
Definitely it makes it more interesting no matter what. Right. So knowing the rules, that's as a GM, that's pretty important. Number 2, try smaller player groups. If you're consistently running with 10 people, 8 people, try a 6-player game or 4-player game. What was it that you said? I forget what it was. Even in board games, right? We play Lords of Waterdeep, and we have a large group. So easily we can have 8 people playing the game.
7. Usually.
There's 3 of us, 4 of them, 7. And if we have a friend over or somebody over, that's 8. Yeah, it's 8.
Which I've been telling Saul, you need to get more 6-player games because for some reason our boys want to play board games with us, which I'm not complaining about because who gets to play games with their teenagers and people in their 20s, right?
Right.
It's a very good thing, but the more people, especially Lords of Waterdeep, that game can take, with 6 people, that game can take a good 2 hours.
Yeah.
And half of that time, I don't know what's going on because they're just they're talking and stuff. And I'm like going, I'm never going to win this game. I can't figure out what I'm doing.
They'll usually do it. So, okay, so we're talking about Lords of Waterdeep. It's a good game. It goes from 4 players to...
No, it goes from 2 players to...
2 players to 6. But you add the 6th player, and then there's a version called the long game, and it is a 2-hour game. Now, some people who play board games go, "What's 2 hours?" But in our group, that's a little long.
That's about the limit of mine and Kathy's tolerance.
The women, the boys could play forever, but yeah. So
but that does so. But if you play with 4 players,
yeah. But you said you played at the con with 4 people, and it was
you cut it down. It's the same. It was me and Kathy and the boys,
right?
2 of the boys, but for combat, that's the same thing. If you have 4 characters playing versus 6 characters playing, the amount of time that it takes to get back around to somebody else's initiative, right, is
right. Shorter.
Yeah.
It
also depends on the kind of combat, right? Because there's like feng shui combat where you describe what you're going to do, and then there's Pathfinder combat where you're crunching the numbers to see, what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, but some people say that that's the problem with those real crunchy games is that people forget to describe what they're doing instead of just I hit. I'm going to just swing my sword. I hit 14 points of damage.
Well, and then but like in feng shui, when we played the last game we played, Steve was having a really hard time because the dice were not in his favor. And so he was like getting kind of frustrated, even though he was describing what he was going to do. It didn't happen.
Right.
Because he couldn't get the roll.
Because the roll, yeah, bad rolls. Try smaller groups. I think that would really help your game flow. I mean, just automatically.
That's easy to say, but if you have a group of 6 of your 6 friends that you play with all the time, I'm going to say that, saying, okay, 2 of you can't play in this game is not going to work, right?
Well, you're right. I think you are in a pickle when you have that problem because what are you going to do? I mean, if you have 6 of your friends and they know that
you play,
and you have a game and you've been playing games for years or whatever, then
you're just going to need to learn to come up with other strategies than making it a smaller game.
Right.
But if it's a con game or a game where you have lots of different friends, like Saul has all kinds of groups he plays with, right? So
I want to say lots. I have 2.
Okay, fine.
3.
Yeah, exactly.
I could be in more, but I just don't have the time.
It's just not enough time.
Goddamn work.
There's difference between your friends that you've been playing with since high school and you all live in the same town and you're all together, or you're online every Friday night. They're going to know because you have a group text or things like that, right?
Right.
Versus you going, okay, who's going to be available? And the Stanford group, which Shannon calls it, our friends because that's where Cowie lives. They play right now on Zoom or what's
online.
The other one? Online. So
we also use Discord, but yeah. And Roll20.
But everybody can't always make it. So sometimes the group is between 2 and 5, right?
Right.
So that makes it so then you can run a game for less players and see how it goes, right? If you want the combat to go faster.
Yeah. And I think the number of players, it just so happens to be how many people can show up.
Right.
And so when we were playing lately, the group is really busy. Like Cowie loves snow, right? And
it's tax season, so Jolene doesn't get to play as much.
Right. So Cowie's out in Tahoe and her connection kind of sucks, and she's busy with family visiting and stuff like that. And skiing, yes, and her skiing. A snow bunny from Hawaii. Who would have thought? Maybe she's got tired of that island hot temperature because it's freezing up there. It's gonna be cold to have snow. But anyway, so she's up there, snow skiing, whatever you call it, and enjoying that and visiting with her family. So she hasn't been playing lately, and in the foreseeable future, she isn't joining us for a few weeks. And then other people, just adult life, right? Oh, they're not available. Things happen and this and that. So you're right. Our group, is like expands and contracts depending on who's available. The Friday group that we have, there was a guy who was looking for a job. They landed a job. Now he's super busy much like you are, and literally cannot join us on Friday evenings because he's so burnt out, or he's commuting going home. So I mean that prevents him from playing. So our groups the ones I'm in, has really gotten smaller. So
but that's a cyclical thing, right?
Yes. And I think it's pretty neat that we have that experience between a smaller group and a larger group, and see the differences, and then be able to figure out what would make a larger group flow better and work better. And a lot of it, like you said, if the players have a lot of knowledge, or are very knowledgeable about the game, how the game mechanics works, I think the game's going to go much easier.
I know when I run games with a lot of people, well, even with not a lot of people, with guys that want to talk a lot, I tend to be not nervous. I tend to worry that it's going to take too long during the combat. So as soon as I usually just call out the person's name whose turn it is, right? And then as soon as they're done, I call out the next person's name to keep it going.
Right.
I don't know if that's a good plan or not, but it makes me feel less like there's too much time in between.
Right. I think sometimes, just calling the people's names out, or even say, "Oh, your turn's next," and think about what you're going to do. And I've done that, especially when the kids were young. Our kid and our friends' kids, when they were young, 8, 9, 10, when they were playing Pathfinder, I would say, "Okay, do you know what you're going to do next?" They go, "Yeah, okay." So I would go boom, 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 and so it would flow better because they were organized and they were quick to do whatever they can do their die roll and stuff, and knew what they were going to do ahead of time. A lot of that definitely speeds up gameplay when the players are ready for whatever.
Yeah.
For their moment in the spotlight, right? For their moment when they get to act.
You learn when you're playing with kids that you need to tell them when their turn is going to come up, because
they forget.
They may not be ready. And it's good for them to think about it, because because everybody's been there where it gets to somebody's turn and they're like, "Oh, well, let me think about what I want to do."
I was gonna throw a fireball, but such and such got in my way. So that does happen, and there are circumstances when the players' plans kind of change because things change in the game itself. So yeah, I think like I said, having a smaller group is definitely a plus. A small player group definitely helps. So let's move on to the other idea I had, which was using a lighter rules game, right? You have Space Opera, right? You have Aftermath, and then you have Serenity. There's 2 Serenity games. So Serenity and Firefly. So if you pick a game that isn't very complicated or is rules light, I think games will flow better, right? There's less complication or less minutia to deal with, and it's just going to make the game run faster if that is a concern about your table.
If it's a really crunchy system, and you're worried about the time constraints, especially if you're running a con game, you only have a certain amount of time. But the combat is probably, depending on the game you're playing. Right. The combat might be the most exciting thing that's happening, right? You've built up to this crescendo of the big boss that you're fighting. But if you have either cheat sheets for your players,
right,
where they don't have to do the math, or you specifically tell them, when you're using this weapon, you want to roll a 75, or this is your gold number, right?
Right.
These are the dice you're rolling. If you have a cheat sheet for them, especially if it's really complicated, it's easier. If it's a 2d6 system like Traveler or Feng Shui, right?
Feng Shui, yeah.
I mean, it's a lot easier unless you have exploding 6s, which is fine, but it just means that you have to have extra dice. Yeah. But those kind of things will be very helpful. Like especially for a con game, if you want it to go faster, if you have the characters and you know what each character can do, you can, especially if it's complicated, like Space Opera. Look, I've sit down at the table to play Space Opera with these guys. I have no clue how the combat system works. And there's all these charts and different things that you have to take into consideration. And all my question is, do I have to roll high or do I have to roll low? Because you're rolling 2 10-sided dice. It's a percentile thing, right? So to me, that's the most important question to me, because I don't know, because when I roll, I want to know if I've hit or not. And if I can't figure out what number I'm supposed to roll, then it's going to be harder and
Right.
take me longer. So my question is always, am I rolling high or low, Felipe?
If he's Flair.
If he's the one
Even if
running
he's
the
not there,
game.
you still say Felipe. Which I think is kind of funny that you use space opera as an example, because I ran space opera at conventions for like 10 years. I ran games over and over, not games, the same game, but I ran continuous adventures, and players would come, and sometimes it was the same player. One of them was Jonah. He would, constantly come to my games, and that's how I got to know him, is that he came to my games and kept coming to my games, and I got to know him. And it was fun, and the reason I made the game that way is that I wanted the game to have this idea that it was continuing. So just in case people like Jonah came and came back to my games over and over again, it would make sense. It would be more. It would seem like there was a bigger story,
Right.
and that for me was the GM decision that I did, and I think it worked out pretty well. But the problem is that space opera is exceedingly complicated. So there was a lot of subsystems I just took out. Right, there was like there's to hit, there's a location, there's if you penetrated armor, blah, 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 blah. So I took out armor, right? Because basically they're always in a space
Armor.
in space, in a space station, and they're not wearing armor, right? They're just like wearing regular clothes. So, and I told them, well, the station manager, because they weren't in charge, the station manager wants you, because they were just security guys, kind of. So the station manager doesn't want you to wear an armor because it would look bad. It's like Babylon 5. Nobody in that show wore armor unless they were going into like combat. So unless they were going into a combat mission, then I would let them wear armor. But it was real easy. I mean, it was just, to me it was easy. But for the most part, I wanted to eliminate die rolls, right? I wanted to eliminate how long it took from going one player to the next, because I knew that it was a complicated system. And in that game, there's all kinds of modifiers, right? There's a modifier for this, modifier for that. And in the rules, it says that just take the highest negative modifier that there is. Don't compound all these negative modifiers.
Because then you would die easily.
Well, not only that, but it would take a long time. But at the same time, it doesn't say that for positive ones, right? So like if I don't know, there's all kinds of things why you would get a plus, at least in the game. And what I did is I took all those different pluses and minuses and this and that, and I made like 10 of them. Like if you're doing this is what you get. Like if you are aiming, you get plus 10%, something like that. And then the negative modifiers, they wouldn't have to worry about it because I would have my own like GM screen or whatever. But the game wasn't really about combat, even though it's a combat heavy role playing game, because they were a lot of times they were just investigating stuff. So, but the combats were quick and not necessarily deadly, because in space opera you have a lot of hit points. You are not invulnerable, but you can take a lot of hits. But I had to definitely condense the rules and change them to make it for me a good con game. So I wouldn't have to spend an hour explaining how the rules went. So what I did too is I did do cheat sheets, right? I put these. In fact, I still have them. In fact, once somebody that went to DungeonCon, when I mentioned that I ran space opera for 10 years, goes, "Hey, are you going to run that game again?" And then I'm like, "Well, maybe I will if I get enough interest." But even back then, when I was running it, it was already a dead game. I mean, I was running.
It's not a dead game. It's an out of print game.
No, it's not. Actually, not anymore, because the guy who runs the company still was printing the game and selling it online. So anyway, but it was a very obscure game at the very least. And so what I did exactly what you said. I made cheat sheets that I put in a booklet in a folder that had the player's character sheet. I had it in one of those little plastic sheets so they can write on it.
Yeah.
And then I had the cheat sheet, and then I had the order of combat. It was obviously needed. And then in the back, I just had scratch paper, like sheets
For people to write on.
Write on, for like lists of stuff that they wanted to. So it was really neat when they would come into the game and they would sit down, because I never took any of that stuff out. Whatever. But I never took any of that stuff out. So they would read that. Oh, they go, well, what's all this stuff? I go, that was somebody else played that character before, and they're like, and that to them, to the players who were sitting down and had never played before, go, oh, this is like really neat, because these are like living characters, which is the whole point of that, why I did that. But I did do that. I did put cheat sheets in there. I try to make it as easy as possible, even though for the most part when combat happened, it would be the slower way of doing things. The game would definitely slow down.
Well,
But,
you can't change that in space opera because that's just the way it is.
right, and you can't change that. I don't think in any role playing game when combat starts, time compresses. Right, when you're running around doing things, it'll take you an hour to go to that bar over there on this side of town. You're talking about huge lengths of time, and then when combat starts, you're
It's
playing
6-second
turns,
intervals.
3-second turns, 1 second turn. I think it's 1 second in Shadowrun. So everything's moving slower because that's the way it has to happen for combat to work for the most part. And I think you're right. I think cheat sheets for players and yourself just definitely help the game flow. Because if you have players that have never played this system, they definitely need help as far as what to do when combat starts.
Yeah.
Can you think of any other things that would make the game flow better at your game table? I think we discussed what the size of the group, player knowledge, cheat sheets, running simpler games. And I'll go back to simpler games. We didn't really discuss too much about it, but like I said, there's certain games that are just more complicated than others. There's like Space Opera, and then there's Coriolis, which is a New Year Zero engine. And even that one is a little bit complicated. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to that game. And there might be a space game out there that is really simple. Traveler is really simple. It's 2d6. You have to roll a certain number to hit. And I don't know what that number is. I think it used to be just a 4 or higher or 6 or higher. But
I think it's 6 or higher.
you get pluses and minuses. And that's super simple. And there's different versions of that. Traveler, there's...
It would be nice if the GM made the characters for you so they didn't die as you were making them. That's all I got to say.
Well, he let you live.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, another problem I had with Traveler, and some people love the fact that this issue of Traveler is that you don't get a character that you choose to make, right? You get a character that randomly gets their skills. Everything's random, right? Their social standing, everything, their skills, and how long they've been in the service. Like, you may have this idea that you want to be in the service for a long time, come out a major, or like,
and you're mustered out the second time.
It's like me when I was playing Call of Cthulhu, right? I wanted to be this tough, hard-boiled cop.
But the numbers didn't work that way.
He was this weak guy, and he was super smart. I'm like, well, he looks like a stuffy professor. And some people do enjoy that. And I thought that was pretty neat in that Call of Cthulhu game, that I had this expectation of, I wanted this kind of character, but the numbers didn't play that out. And then in Traveler, I really didn't have an idea what I wanted, but the character that was rolled up was definitely nobody I wanted to really play. Because he kind of sucked, right? And that's the thing about Traveler, is that a lot of the characters just aren't very good.
Oh, it puts everybody on an equal footing.
So I think if you think about running the game and trying to make it flow better, there's all kinds of things you can do. You can even look up on the internet and try to find other ideas that will make your game flow better. I think a lot of it has to do with the rules and the size of your group. If you can't control that, then you, like Jolene said, make sure that the players know what they're doing or know the rules a little bit better. And you can help players learn the rules. I mean, that's a good thing to do, is meet with them either online or something and ask them if they have any questions about the rules. And if you do that, then like when they show up at the table, they don't have to ask that question.
Or if it's a con game, if you take the time you've made the characters, you could take the time to write out ideas for the people playing. Like, this guy can do this, he can't do this, or
right,
things
or
like that. Yeah.
This is what he does. Yeah, in the War Stories game that I have, I put down he's a sniper, or he's this, or he's that.
Just to give them a clue as to what they're doing, right? Because it's a pre-made character. So
yes, and that's what at con games, I totally think that pre-made characters is the way to go. The only time I didn't do that was with Tales from the Loop, where people actually made characters there, and it literally took 15 minutes. There's a gentleman called Michael who does like a Traveler-esque one, but now he does all kinds. He's really into like the old 40s rocket movies, where they take off into the moon. He always lets you make your characters, but he does a system called Nugget, which I've never played with, but I remember he did it was kind of Traveler-esque, but it was like his own version, right, to how to make a character.
Right.
You would, I don't know if you picked your stats, and then you picked everything. You picked the skills, and you only had so many points to spend. boom, bada bing, bada boom. It took you 10, 15 minutes to make a character, which is acceptable at a con. Now, an hour?
No.
Unless it's a 12-hour game.
Because you're not going to have enough time to run the game. There's some ideas for you. Good luck.
Yes.
This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
You have a good day.